Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, we're here with Carleton University's Steve Saideman. He is our NATO expert. Because there's all this talk about Greenland and how this could end NATO, I figure we should have a discussion about what that means and what Article 5 means in this kind of a context and why that's important for this kind of a conversation. So I guess why don't we start with that basic around what is it about Article 5 that most people aren't quite understanding in this kind of a context?
Article 5 has never prevented war or conflict amongst NATO members simply because the whole promise of attack against one is attack against all doesn't count for members, attacking members. So Greece and Turkey have been at war while both are members of NATO. To invoke Article 5 does not require any individual country to go Osseo Article 5 or pull a magic chord. It requires the alliance as a whole to come to an agreement, to a consensus. Every decision at NATO is made by consensus. And if the decision is aimed at a member, then that member can then block consensus, which is why we've had problems in the past over Turkey and Hungary. This is why we can't expel them, because Hungary or Turkey would vote against that and block that. And to have the United States prey upon the territory of a member would be something that the alliance could not handle.
Right. Right, and to that extent, that's I guess the context in which the Danish Prime Minister said that a military attack on Greenland could fracture NATO, and I guess so that's the context in that because they wouldn't be able to achieve consensus in terms of one of their own members being predatory against another.
Well, it's beyond that, which is that because Denmark is a member of NATO and because Greenland is a part of Denmark, there is no reason for the United States to be worried about providing security for Greenland because it already does so through the NATO treaty. That
Right.
the United States has bases there, has had tremendous amount of access to Greenland, that anybody attacking Greenland would essentially be attacking an ally of the United States. And the United States has promised to respond. So there's no real threat to Greenland. Everybody's deterred from attacking Greenland. So that's part one of this. Part two of this is, again, the alliance is aimed to have countries of similar values working together to prevent anyone from being attacked. And if the United States is doing the attacking, then you can't really count on the United States on protecting the Baltics or any other country from anybody else. So the essential promise at the heart of the treaty, which is each country shares a common set of interests, goes away. And then if the United States were to try to annex Greenland by force or in any other way, really,
Mm-hmm.
the Danes would probably pull out of the alliance because they can't force the United States to leave. So if the
Yeah.
United States would leave, then the Danes would probably leave and take most of Scandinavia with them. And the alliance by itself would no longer be credible. We always thought that Trump would kill NATO, not in this way, but possibly by not responding to a Russian attack on the Baltics.
Right.
The fear was always that if the Russians attacked the Baltics, the United States wouldn't respond. And then, wow, what's NATO good for? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was reading Anna Applebaum saying something the other day as well in terms of, they kind of expected Trump to go after NATO, but not in this particular way.
This is a different way of doing it. The other ways that Trump could have destroyed NATO was to have the United States pull out of NATO.
Right.
That was the most obvious way. A second way would have been, again, for the Russians to attack in some kind of way, and either the United States blocks consensus so that way NATO can't respond to, let's say, an invasion of Latvia, or B, the United States invokes a subclause of Article 5, which Article 5 says an attack upon one is equal to attack upon all, and each country will respond as each deems necessary, which means that the United States could say, okay, you guys can go defend Latvia from the Russians, but we're going to set this one out. And that too would break NATO because the United States provides so much in the way of critical capabilities that NATO really can't operate without the United States.
Yeah, and this is kind of the question I've been wrestling with in the last few days, and I've got a column this weekend out on this very topic in terms of, we we at least in Canada should be preparing for this eventuality, but you're saying here that without the U.S., NATO, at least in the short term, would be at a severe disadvantage.
Yes, it would be so much disadvantage that it's not clear that it could actually do anything or cooperate. That the United States provides a lot of the comm systems, provides a lot of the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, provides a lot of the air defense, provides a lot of the deep strike, provides a lot of the satellite capabilities, and most importantly, it provides the nuclear deterrent.
Right.
That any attack on any member of NATO risks the possibility, not an immediate nuclear war, but
Hmm.
risks the possibility of the United States getting involved in a way that might lead to an escalation that could lead to nuclear war. One of the most striking things about the, the war in Ukraine is that the Russians have not engaged in any conventional attacks against any country neighboring Ukraine.
Right.
That a lot of equipment is flying through, sailing through, driving through Poland, and Poland has not faced any attacks, any conventional military attacks, whereas the United States standard procedure for war is to usually interdict the supply of arms heading towards the battlefield. Bombing, drone strikes in Pakistan, bombing Cambodia, and on and on and on. And so the Russians
Yeah.
are refrained from this. Why are they refrained from this? Because they are deterred by NATO, by the possibility that an attack upon Poland might lead to a process by which the United States might use nuclear weapons. Now, people might say, hey, but France and Britain have nuclear weapons. And the answer is yes, they do. But the United States spent an incredible amount of effort over the course of the Cold War to prove not only to the Soviets and then the Russians, but also to the Europeans that they would be willing to risk Chicago for Bonn, New York for Paris, that kind of thing. And the
Yeah.
question is, would France be willing to sacrifice Paris for Riga? Would the Brits, with their incredibly dysfunctional political system over the past 10 years, credibly commit to using its nuclear weapons in the defense of Estonia?
Hmm.
Would they be willing to risk London for Tallinn? It takes a lot of effort to try to convince somebody that you're willing to go to that level. And so it's going to take a lot of work for the French and the British to try to replace that nuclear deterrent. So one of the big consequences of the end of NATO might be nuclear proliferation. The Poles might acquire nuclear weapons. The Germans could build nuclear weapons. The Swedes could build nuclear weapons. And one of the things that people underestimate is how much American security guarantees have limited nuclear proliferation. The Japanese don't have nuclear weapons. South Koreans don't have nuclear weapons. The Australians don't have nuclear weapons. Why? Because they've all sheltered under the American nuclear umbrella. Without that deterrent, they have to figure out how else to deter attacks upon themselves. And the
Mm.
obvious answer is to develop their own nuclear weapons.
Okay, that's something I hadn't quite really thought about either. And I'm sure that this will increase the calls by by certain people in Canada that we need our own nuclear deterrence, which I don't know is something too many of us would be that comfortable with.
Well, the fun fact is that because Canada was a partner in the original Manhattan Project to develop the first atomic bomb, Canada actually has essentially access to the original IP of the bomb project. And Canada, because it has its own uranium deposits, it has its own nuclear power industry, it could do this.
Yeah.
If a Princeton, I think it was a Princeton graduate student, but it might have been a Princeton undergraduate student, can build basically a working model of a nuclear weapon. This is a classic story from like 30 years ago. Then certainly Canada could. It would just be
Yeah.
expensive. And then the question would be, how would one deliver it? Because we don't really have much in the way of delivery vehicles. And getting a nuclear weapon down to the size where it can be dropped by, let's say, an F-35 is hard.
Yeah.
But again, not impossible. So the tricky part for all these countries is how to get the nuclear weapon to be of a size that you can deliver it and then have the delivery mechanisms to deliver it. But all these countries that I talked about have advanced aircraft have some kind of missile development possibilities.
Hmm.
So that would be a problem, but it would not be an obstacle that they couldn't overcome.
Yeah. Um, I guess it's just interesting to just to think about I guess, game out some of the possibilities with what could be happening, vis-a-vis the Americans in this kind of a situation, because I guess, Greenland is one thing, but it's also the way the Americans have kind of dragged their feet with Ukraine and so on as well, in that they are they have those air defense capabilities that Ukraine needs, but in the meantime, Ukraine has been developing its own defenses, in its own particular way, like the interceptor drones and stuff, which are becoming much more effective and much more cost effective as well. And I guess I'm just wondering how, I guess, we kind of think about this in the way that this capability gap, should the Americans leave NATO, or
Mm-hmm.
break up NATO, how that, I guess, plays itself out.
Well, it plays itself out in a couple different ways. One is it reduces American power. So one of the ironies of this is Trump, in all of his latest interviews, talked about power, 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 power. But all of this is reducing American power. It's reducing American influence,
Mm.
and it's countries are developing, drones and other anti-aircraft capabilities. They're also developing alternative systems for paying bills, and they might develop alternate systems for managing the internet. Because for one of the things I talked about in my blog today is the people who work for the International Criminal Court have been sanctioned by the United States, which means they can't function online,
Yeah.
essentially. And so this is forcing the Europeans to think about how do we develop alternatives to all these American-based companies and systems, and that will ultimately reduce the American power. That the Chinese and the Russians are for years have been trying to get off of the SWIFT financial system, because that ability to move money around has been, based on American regulations and technology, and
Right.
if they find a substitute for that, then they will, and then the United States will have less leverage. And so the United States is burning a lot of its power. So that's one thing. Countries are hedging. Hedging takes place in a couple of ways. Trump is very proud that European countries are now spending more money on defense, as well as Canada. And it might be because he's pushing them, or it might be because they're looking for development capabilities for the day when they can't rely on the United States.
Yeah.
That is sort of Carney's kind of justification for what he's sort of talked about doing, but hasn't really done yet,
Hmm.
which is reducing dependence on the United States supply chain, is aimed at making Canada more capable in case it can't rely on the United States. That's
Yeah.
not exactly doing what Trump wants. Trump wants Canada to buy lots of American stuff so his buddies can profit from it. So the United States will become weaker. So that's one of the things. I already mentioned the nuclear proliferation.
Hmm.
The Russians, I don't think, need any encouragement to engage in aggression. They would do this with or without this going on.
Yeah.
Certainly, Trump is sending mixed signals to the Chinese about Taiwan. So if I were the Chinese, I wouldn't be all that comfortable about Trump, but I might be a little more encouraged than I would have been under, a different American president.
Right.
That an attack upon Taiwan, or a seizure of Taiwan, or a blockade of Taiwan might not lead to a vigorous American response. If I were Japan, if I were South Korea, woo, they live in the most dangerous part of the world other than Ukraine,
Yeah.
and they should be really worried about how they can provide for their own security, because they cannot rely on the United States anymore. So the United States is going to be less powerful. NATO is going to fall apart. The European Union isn't quite the same thing, and it's going to take a long time, even if it were to act coherently, to develop all the technology. So we'd have like a 10-year period, maybe more longer than that,
Mm.
where they simply don't have the same kind of capability as NATO does today. They have to build in all those technologies that are the glue of NATO that the United States would pull out. All the wiring that joins all these things together. One classic example of this is when France and Britain wanted to bomb Libya, and they invited the Americans along for the ride. the Americans like, if we're going to do this, we need to use a NATO facility because you guys can't command and control an air war, a minor, finite air war over a
Yeah.
country that doesn't have air defenses, without having some, the center that has the ability to talk to all the airplanes, all the refueling airplanes, all of the electronic warfare airplanes, all of the uh, air airborne warning and control system aircraft, and all the fighter bombers. Right, all those
Yeah.
need to be coordinated so they don't run into each other, and so that everybody can fly safely and get refueled and hit the right targets. Can't really do that without a NATO headquarters command post. And a lot of that stuff would go away without the Americans running it.
Okay. And on the other hand, America would lose all their European bases that they use as part of their Middle East operations.
Absolutely. Now, this has been actually one of the pluses from the standpoint of the isolationists or restraintists in the United States. There have been folks advocating for pulling out of Europe, so that way the next time a president is tempted to intervene in the Middle East, they can't do so as easily. Um, Again, something that I mentioned is that the largest, most capable medical facility for handling people wounded in war is in Germany. It's an American base in Landstuhl. And if the Americans pull out of Europe, that goes away. And that means that the Americans, if they operate in the Middle East and take casualties, means that people will die. More
Yeah.
people will die than otherwise would. And that medical capability, yes, we have doctors, we have people who can help out, but the Americans bring a whole lot of medical capability to any fight, and that's one reason why we are at a historically abnormal ratio between those who are killed in battle and those who are wounded in battle. The traditional one is 1 in 3.
Hmm.
It's been 1 in 10 or so over Afghanistan and Iraq because we get people to medical treatment within an hour, and they get all the treatment that they can get to save their lives.
Yeah.
That those people would die without all that stuff going on, and that means that the ratio of Canadians dying in a Latvia thing, or even just a peacekeeping conflict someplace else, would be more. There's going to be more unnecessary death because of all of what Trump's doing, which goes along with what they're doing domestically with RFK and the
Yeah.
healthcare system and with ICE and all the other things that the United States are doing.
Um, I'm trying to think, how do we leave this on some kind of a positive note? But I don't know that there is one. It's all kind of a bit of a doomsday scenario, all because, Trump is, has no understanding about how these kinds of power dynamics work.
The upside for this, for those who are opposed to American imperialism, is that in the future, the United States will be less equipped to exert its influence around the world.
Right.
It'll be less equipped to dominate. Trump wants to dominate the world, but he's burning through all of the resources. And so the good news is, in the long run, the United States will be a less powerful country, which will be something that a lot of folks favor.
Hmm.
On the other hand, I can't help but finish with bad news.
Yeah.
But the bad news is that there are folks traditionally have been far greater threats to peace and security in the United States. And so if I were people in Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Ukraine, Poland, this is not good.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that particular cheery note, thanks again for doing this, and we'll talk again in the near future.
Sounds good, Dale. My pleasure.
All right. Thanks. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter and journo_Dale_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.